The Sega Genesis had a program called GEMS which helped create music for games. Quite a large number of games used GEMS, even some that you wouldn't expect. Could this program actually produce good music, or was it just fart sounds like everyone says? And most importantly, why was GEMS created in the first place? Let's take a look. What's going on? It's Podrez, coming at you with another video. Alright, if you've seen a couple of my videos and you like what I do, hit that subscribe button right there. That way you'll be notified when I make a new video. I'm going to try to go for 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Only you can help me get there. And we got a Discord server, just go to discord.podrez.net, or I'll put a link in the description as well. Anyway, let's talk about the GEMS program. In 1988, the Sega Mega Drive came out in Japan, and a little less than a year later, it was released under the name Genesis in the US. While Japanese companies had no issues developing games for it, that was not the case with American companies. The Genesis used an FM-based sound chip, which sounded much better than its competitor, the NES, but American companies were not familiar with this type of sound chip. Sega also didn't provide a lot of documentation on their hardware, so it seemed like American companies were out of the loop. Sega was already having issues with obtaining third-party support for their new console, so it didn't help that it was also difficult to produce high-quality sound on it. Who's gonna agree to sign up for Team Sega if it's very difficult to make games? A majority of the early Genesis titles were made by Sega or other Japanese companies, so as a result, we would hear what the Genesis sound chip was capable of. But these were done by professionals that knew how to create FM-based sound. If Sega wanted to get American developers on board too, they would need to produce an easy-to-use sound driver program for the Genesis. In desperation, Sega contacted the company Recreational Brainware. In 1991, the program was released under the name Genesis Editor for Music and Sound Effects, or GEMS for short. The program finally gave American companies a way to produce high-quality sound and music for their games, but this would come at a huge cost. A lot of the Genesis games had wacky sound effects, sometimes even fart sounds. A lot of games also recycled sound effects from other games since they all used GEMS. But was GEMS an incapable program, or could it actually produce high-quality music? Let's take a look at a bunch of random games. Fantasia is one of the first games to use GEMS. You play as Mickey Mouse, and it's a basic platformer where you walk to the right to beat the stage. You have projectiles that you can fire off if you have enough magic. However, magic is very limited in this game, so once you run out, you have to rely on jumping to beat the enemies. I feel like Mickey Mouse should have a default attack like a broom handle or something and not just jumps, because a lot of the stage layouts make it hard to defeat enemies with jumps. The collision detection is also very weird in this game, and it's extremely difficult to jump on moving platforms. The music is some of the worst I've ever heard on the console. This is an insult considering that the movie it's based off of is very well known for its music. This is a very mediocre game and a very bad start for GEMS. Now let's take a look at a couple games by Blue Sky Software. This is not a super well-known company, but they actually made some great games. Jurassic Park is one of their best titles. You can play as either Grant or the Raptor, and you must platform your way through the stages. As Grant, you have various weapons you can pick from. The controls are very hard to get used to. Some dinosaurs only die to certain weapons, and it can be very difficult to cycle through your inventory during the action. There's also a lot of frame drops throughout the game. Despite that, it's still a lot of fun to play as him. My favorite stage is the boat one where you can maneuver through waterfalls. The Raptor controls much differently. He can jump extremely high and is much faster. Sometimes you can even outrun the screen. It's a lot of fun, but there's some weird glitches. You're able to fall into bottomless pits without dying if you know how to do it, and when ducking, you can basically float in the air. It seems like the developers did not spend a lot of time programming for the Raptor. The game is unfortunately very short. You can easily beat it as the Raptor in less than 10 minutes. Grant does have a few more levels though. Despite the game using GEMS, the music is still decent, although you do hear some wackiness that's common with GEMS. This is a great game despite the flaws, and I'm glad they went with a platformer rather than a top-down perspective like most of the others. It feels like they were only going to have Grant as a playable character but decided to add the Raptor as a bonus. Either way, that's really cool. Let's try another one of Blue Sky's other games, Desert Demolition starring Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. Like with the previous game, you can play as two different characters. As Roadrunner, it's a Sonic-style game where you can go very fast. As Wile E. Coyote, you have various abilities you can obtain from Acme boxes. Your only goal in this game is to walk to the right and complete the stage, but if you collect enough stamps, you can unlock a bonus stage at the end. Your biggest enemy in this game is surprisingly the time limit. If you're trying to unlock the bonus stage, you really have to know the stage layout because you barely get enough time to collect the required stamps. There's not a lot of music in this game except for a short tune that plays when your character is running. I actually really like it, and it doesn't sound like Gems to be honest. Like with the other game, it's unfortunately very short, and you can easily beat it in less than 10 minutes. Despite that, this is a very unique title with lots of replayability despite the short length. This is a title that I come back to every once in a while because it's very enjoyable. Blue Sky Software had some very creative ideas, and they used their licenses much better than other companies did with the exact same licenses. Speaking of Looney Tunes games, here's Taz Escape from Mars. The premise is that Marvin the Martian wants a new pet, so he abducts Taz. As Taz, your spinning ability not only destroys enemies, but it's also your method of transportation. You can bounce off walls to reach higher platforms, and you can go upside down. You can eat items throughout the stage, which grant you more health or special abilities. However, Taz will also eat bad items if you're too close. The frame rate is very poor in most of the stages, but for some reason, the bosses, as well as the third stage, run at 60 frames a second. I don't know why the programmers did this. In Stage 2, there's a moving wall that closes in on you, and you must beat the stage as fast as possible to avoid being crushed. As a kid, the stage gave me a lot of trouble, but the developers throw you a bone by giving you a free life at the beginning, so theoretically you can play as many times as you want. The music is definitely not going to make any top 10 lists, but it's good considering that it uses gems. This is one of my favorite childhood games and definitely worth a try. By the way, most of these games are childhood ones of mine. Here's Batman Returns. It's a very clunky platformer with poor controls. You have a grappling hook, which is actually very fun to use. By default, you can only punch and kick, but you have other weapons that you can use temporarily. Batman's walking speed is very slow, and it's difficult to avoid enemies because of it. He can also jump faster than he walks. I hate games like that. Most of the bosses have very abusable patterns. The mini-boss in Stage 2, for example, you can easily trap him in a corner and he can't do anything. The music is nothing special, but not bad for a game that uses gems. This is definitely not the best Batman game. The NES ones are much better, but this is still an okay game. Because a lot of American companies used gems, there happens to be a lot of Genesis games based on American TV shows that fall into this category. Case in point, here's Stimpy's Invention starring Ren and Stimpy. The premise is that Ren creates a machine that turns garbage into food, but his machine explodes into a bunch of pieces, so Ren and Stimpy must go through town and find all the parts. You play as both Ren and Stimpy at the same time, and you can use each other for special abilities. For example, in the zoo stage, you can leap from one hippo to another using both Ren and Stimpy. The controls are hard to get used to because numerous times I activated the wrong ability by mistake. I'm sure over time this gets easier. The graphic style and humor is well in line with the TV show. The music is surprisingly good despite using gems.
Happy. You stupid idiot.
Unsurprisingly, some of the sound effects that are used in this game are also used in other Gems games. This type of thing is inevitable. This is an excellent game and definitely worth checking out. Speaking of cartoons, here's Garfield Caught in the Act. The premise is that Garfield tries to fix the family TV that he accidentally broke, but in the process he accidentally gets sucked into it. Each stage in this game is a different TV show. As Garfield, you have a short-range attack, and you can also throw projectiles temporarily. The stages have so much variety. Garfield looks slightly different in each stage, and even the projectile he throws is different. The graphics in general are very colorful and well done. This is honestly one of the best looking Genesis games I've seen. The music is very well done, and I wouldn't have realized it uses gems if I didn't look it up. The game is very generous with health refills and free lives, and overall it is pretty easy. This is a solid Genesis title and worth checking out. Here's a game that everyone knows about, Aladdin. It's a basic platformer where you just have to make it to the end of the stage. Some levels do require you to collect certain objects to progress though. You have a sword by default, but you can collect apples that are handy for hard to reach enemies. The game is well known for its stunning visuals, and the sprites were actually hand-drawn by Disney animators. It feels like you're acting out the real movie yourself. This is one of the best games on the Genesis by far, and it's very surprising that it uses gems. Despite that, the soundtrack is excellent. One last note that I wanted to make. There's a cheat code in the game where you can skip to the next level by pausing and pressing ABBA, ABBA. Gems, thank you for the music. There's quite a few other games that use gems. Comic Zone is a fun beat 'em up with nice visuals and decent music. Echo the Dolphin: The Tides of Time uses a modified version of gems, and while you can definitely hear the wacky sound effects in the notes, it still sounds good. Surprisingly, Toy Story also uses gems. This is proof that you can still make a technologically impressive game despite using gems. Earthworm Jim is one of the most well-known Genesis titles. The graphics and animation are very well done, almost like you're playing a real cartoon. And yup, it uses gems. Sonic Spinball was developed exclusively by the American division of Sega, which means it opted to use gems. It's the only mainstream Sonic title to use it. Under the right hands, you could really do a lot with a gems program. It was all up to the user. There were a lot of games that sounded bad, but if the user was more experienced with the program, gems was capable of producing some excellent sounding music. Gems was used in over 200 Genesis titles, and while the program generally has a negative reputation by gamers today, if it weren't for it, a lot of these games may never have happened. We should thank gems for making it easier for companies to deliver excellent games to the public. So now that we looked at games that used gems, let's talk about some companies that did not. First up is Konami. None of the games that they developed used gems because they had a team of composers that were well experienced with FM sound chips. Sure enough, we would get some excellent tracks in the majority of their games. Next up is Accolade. They chose not to use gems for their sound or music either. This is not exactly a compliment though, as Bubsy is not known for having high quality music or sound. Sega also didn't use gems for a lot of their titles. Their Sonic games besides Spinball did not use gems, and their early titles didn't use it because it didn't exist yet. Sega's Japanese team was well experienced with FM sound chips, but their American team was not, so there were some Sega-developed games that used gems. EA also didn't use gems for a majority of their games. Road Rash specifically had excellent music. While gems is a viable program, any composers that knew how to utilize FM sounds will always get more out of the console's capabilities. With the Genesis using FM-based sound, American companies had a lot of trouble making high-quality sounding music. Sega wanted to make it easier for them, so they commissioned a company to make the Gems program. Gems had a questionable reputation among the retro gaming community for producing fart sounds, but upon further inspection, some games still sounded great despite the use of gems. Not to mention, a lot of these games were great. Without gems, we might have missed out on some excellent titles. Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.